All right, well, good morning, everybody. I'm Jennifer Knoll, Principal Planner with MorphC. It's so nice to see all of you. I know we'll have some folks continuing to roll in here over the next moment, but I don't want to wait any longer before we hear from our panel. So welcome to the latest installment of the Regional Housing Strategy Peer Exchange. Before we get started, and as a courtesy to our speakers, I do want to invite everyone just to take a moment right now to confirm that you've turned off your cameras and that you've muted your microphones on your computer as well as on your phone if you're dialing in. Thank you. And on another logistical note, the panel will try to include some audience questions during today's discussion as time allows. The easiest way to interact with our panel is going to be using the Teams chat feature. So please feel free to add your questions and comments into the chat box. We will be monitoring it throughout the morning. So let's talk housing. The Housing Peer Exchange brings together our region's leaders in the public, private, nonprofit, and philanthropic sectors for a deeper exploration of Central Ohio's housing challenges and how our communities are innovating to address them. Today's topic gets right to the heart of one of those challenges: financial resources for housing. There are dozens of resources in Central Ohio totaling over $630 million for residential construction and direct resident assistance, excluding COVID relief. Even so, the demand far exceeds availability. As just one example, here in the city of Columbus, the city offers direct assistance to income-eligible households for home repairs, roof repairs, or home modifications. In any given year, the city can fund around 90 projects. In just 2016 alone, more than 1,200 low-income families requested assistance through this program. And when it comes to construction, the availability of financing is the #1 issue impacting development feasibility in our region, according to our local developers. Flexible financing tools and local assistance can help address Central Ohio's housing needs, but knowing what's available and how to effectively utilize them is a challenge too. Today's panel will share insights into how to optimize what's available, and will offer some innovative ideas for expanding the funding pool. This is an important and a complex topic, and I'm happy to say that we are in very capable hands today with our morning's moderator. Facilitating today's conversation is Patty Huddle, Vice President with the Columbus-Franklin County Finance Authority. You may know Patty from her work with One Columbus, formerly Columbus 2020, where she served as the Senior Vice President for over 9 years. With more than 20 years in the economic development arena, Patty brings a wide range of experience, skills, and knowledge to the Finance Authority, as well as to today's panel. So with that, and now to introduce our panel, Patty, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. Good morning, everybody. It is great to be a part of this conversation. I am facilitating, but I know I'm also going to be learning and curious. So really excited to kick this off. I will note that Councilwoman Favor has a limited schedule to be with us this morning. So we'll kick her off first in her presentation, but would also ask that if you have questions for Councilwoman Favor, she does need to leave by about 10:15 a.m. So please be sure you throw your question in chat and we get those addressed before she has to leave us. We thought the order for the presentations this morning would be Councilwoman Favor, starting with the City of Columbus, then Josh Roth with Franklin County, and then we would wrap things up with Matt Rule, who's with National Church Residences. And I'm really excited with the diversity we have on the panel. We've got local government, we've got county, city, and then also a very, very successful, and I'm proud to say, homegrown organization in the housing space, National Church Residences, which started in Upper Arlington, where I used to be the economic development director and grew very fond of them. But truthfully, when I was there, they were just a fraction of what they are today. So really excited for this panel to share some information with us. We want you to be engaged and think not only, we are talking financial resources, but also think about creative uses of public functions and how we might be able to help the private development community choose our communities for their investments. And with that, Councilwoman Favor, I'm going to ask you to kick us off. And Councilwoman is the chair of the Housing Committee for Columbus City Council. So with that, Councilwoman Favor, please take the floor.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. My name is Shayla Favor, and I do serve as the chair of Housing for Columbus City Council, but I also serve as chair of Public Service and Transportation and Criminal Justice and Judiciary. My background prior to council, I served as an assistant city attorney working with the Columbus City Attorney's Office, primarily abating public nuisance properties. And that is really the education, the background that I bring to this role now as a council member chairing the housing committee, really having the opportunity to see Columbus's neighborhoods, the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, and recognizing that there are opportunities for us as a city and as legislators to lean in a different way to ensure that all of our residents have safe and affordable housing. And so with that, what we're really talking about this morning is how to optimize what's available to you in your positions. And I think that from my perspective, you can answer that question twofold. I think that you take the resources, the financial resources that you have, and that's really talking about how we can maximize buildings, units, housing structures from construction to actually being built. But what I want to start off with is from the policy perspective, and what you can do in order to truly start making a difference in the realm of housing and making sure folks have safe and affordable housing. So in March of 2021, Columbus City Council passed the Housing for All legislative package. This consisted of 3 ordinances that were intended to enhance the rights of tenants and provide opportunity in the search for affordable housing. The 3 policies include source of income discrimination, which is really starting to get the attention that it deserves, not only in Central Ohio, but around the country, which is really exciting. So source of income discrimination, if you're not familiar, operators are prohibited from denying prospective tenants based upon their lawful source of income, including but not limited to income derived from wages, Social Security, supplemental security income, public or private sources, all forms of federal, state, or local assistance payments or subsidies, including rent vouchers, child support, spousal support, and public assistance. But taking a step back, at the city of Columbus, we've really been having this conversation about racism being a public health crisis. And I truly believe that a housing plan must not only be how do we get more units built, but how do we tackle some of these systemic issues that plague a lot of our institutions. And the one that we're here talking about today is housing. And we know that source of income discrimination is a proxy for race discrimination. And so what we are hoping that by implementing this piece of legislation, that this opens up the opportunities for folks that are, generally designated for certain types of housing, if you will, that are forced to be in certain communities that may not have all of the resources and the bells and whistles of other affluent neighborhoods, that if they're able to afford that rent, whether their rent comes from a conventional source like a 9-to-5 or an unconventional source, if you will, like a housing choice voucher, that person has the opportunity to obtain that housing. So this one really brought on a lot of spirited conversation in our community. And I was happy to engage in that conversation with our landlord community, with our tenants, and it's still an ongoing conversation that we're having at the local level. The next piece of legislation was renter's choice. So if an operator requires a tenant to pay a security deposit, they must provide 2 alternatives to paying the deposit in full. So that would be including the payment of the security deposit over a series of 3 monthly installments, or the payment of the security deposit in 6 monthly installments. The tenant could obviously elect to pay the security deposit in the traditional way. What we are intending to do is to provide some choice. The pandemic has really shown us the discrepancies and the inequalities and how our wealth is distributed, not only in the city of Columbus, but across the country. And many folks who have never had faced an eviction, lost a job, found themselves in that unfortunate situation through 2020. What this legislation is doing is providing an opportunity for folks who are having to move fairly quickly into a new housing situation and do not need to be burdened by those upfront move-in costs, which often includes a security deposit that could be pretty hefty. What we are also doing in the city of Columbus, because we understand that security deposit does provide a little bit of a buffer just in case if the what if happens for the landlord. So if the tenant ups and leaves, before the actual lease is up or damages the property, you always have that security deposit to fall back on. And so what we've done is created a risk mitigation pot so that if a tenant leaves before they complete the installment payments that would be included with their rent, then we would reimburse that landlord. So we are still working through how that process will work. But once again, it's engaging with the landlord community. It's engaging with the tenants that helped us to inform what this legislation really needs to look like so as not to penalize landlords and ensure that we're also doing the best we can to advocate on behalf of tenants. The last piece of legislation is rental receipt. And that legislation is pretty common sense. Its operators must provide tenants with a written receipt upon payment of rent or security deposit. Once again, because the city of Columbus very quickly and through the use of CARES Act dollars was able to really ramp up our eviction prevention program, which included emergency rental assistance to tenants. It included legal aid assistance, an attorney actually being present in eviction court for tenants who were facing evictions, and then mediation services. What we were really seeing is that low-income tenants often are unbanked and don't have access to those typical transactions that provide electronic receipts or any type of tracking. And so if they're paying with cash, if they're paying with a money order, it's that much higher of a burden for that tenant to prove that they in fact did pay their rent. So that is a rental receipt in a nutshell. Moving on, something else I wanted to talk about and also hits home with this idea around how to optimize what's available is really taking a look at what your what policies are in place in your respective jurisdictions that need to be updated. The City of Columbus Housing Incentive Policy was ordained in 2018 with the goal to foster private sector investments to build mixed income neighborhoods. So 100% 15-year property tax abatements will be available for all projects, including single family, new construction, and rehabilitation. 10% of units are required to be affordable and rented to households making up to 80% AMI, and 10% of units affordable and rented to households making up to 100% AMI. The city's incentive review policy is up for review this year, 2021, and the Department of Development is currently going through that review process. The city has changed significantly in just the past 3 years, especially when we consider the implications of the pandemic on our workforce and the changing needs for low-income residents. I've been a major advocate of increasing the affordability levels as part of this policy, and we have already seen some developers going above these requirements and meeting the 60% and below AMI levels. We have to be clear when we talk about affordability. 80% to 100% AMI levels are great for our teachers and nurses, but we also have to consider our households who are trying to make ends meet on lower wages and that 60% AMI and below level. Additionally, we have to consider some of the other tangible needs of lower income families in our policy. Are developers collaborating with nonprofits to provide wraparound social services? Are there transportation options to help individuals get to job centers? And the pandemic has taught us a lot about the digital divide. Is there free Wi-Fi access in these new developments? We must continue to be creative and innovative about how we continue to build and serve our populations in greatest need. Let's talk about rental assistance. I touched on it just a little bit earlier. Since last July, the City of Columbus has allocated approximately $32 million in emergency rental assistance to families facing eviction during the pandemic. We have successfully been able to prevent thousands of families from eviction and homelessness. Thanks to incredible partners like Impact Community Action, the Columbus Urban League, Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging, Celebrate One, and so many others, we have been able to ensure access to the assistance for landlords and tenants in needs. The pending American Recovery Fund dollars will allow us to continue these efforts as the pandemic, recovery continues. And then, another creative idea that we launched last month is the Next Home 2021 design competition in Columbus, actually in Franklin County. The competition is calling on architects, builders, and housing developers to address Central Ohio's housing shortage by developing innovative ideas to provide quality housing for our diverse and growing population. Competitors will design a housing solution biddable for $170,000 that will break ground in 2022 and will be constructed in partnership with the Central Ohio Community Land Trust. The competition is collaboratively facilitated by the Neighborhood Design Center in partnership with Central Ohio Community Improvement Corporation, City of Columbus, Land Redevelopment Division, and with the support of the American Institute of Architects Columbus and the Building Industry Association of Central Ohio. That was a lot of folks. All that to say that everyone really agrees and wants to pursue this notion that we can find a better housing solution that is affordable for our residents. The Community Land Trust has done a phenomenal job really ramping up properties over the last 2 years-ish. I would say around 50-ish properties that have been accessible to many people who would not have the opportunity to purchase a home in our current housing boom of a market right now, if you will. And so it's really exciting that we're putting our money where our mouth is and providing an opportunity for creative designers, for architects to participate in solving our housing crisis. It's more than just folks at the legislative level. This is really going to take a community effort with the expertise of folks in our corporate world, in our building world, to really put their heads together to help us really dig ourselves out of our affordable housing crisis, our eviction crisis, and everything else that will be associated with the pandemic. So interested parties can visit nexthome2021.org for more information and to register to participate. And with that, I'll stop there to see if there are any questions about anything I've presented this morning. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. So who's got some questions for Councilwoman Faber? I'll throw one in that struck me as you were talking. You're clearly managing resources that are available to directly benefit that homeowner or that renter. From a staffing standpoint, because of the significance of these undertakings, how has this effort impacted your staffing situation? Did you have to ramp up significantly? Are you reliant upon some of those agencies you're working with? How are you managing that aspect of the need?
That's a really great question. And I think as folks are really evaluating how they can bring some of these initiatives to their own communities or maybe do a spinoff of them, that is a concern. You know, not only are there administrative costs or that administrative burden just in general to be able to make sure that these ideas can get off the ground. We also had COVID. And so folks who were, at the city, our departments were really cut in half, not fired, but just not all present at the same time in order to ensure that our employees were safe as much as possible during those uncomfortable initial months of the pandemic. And so we really did have to get creative with this. And I cannot stress enough that this is really going to be a collaborative effort. And so without our nonprofit partners, without our housing advocates, without folks really stepping up to the plate and say, we are here, we are willing to dive in to help facilitate the disbursement of these funds, to help figure out what will be the best way to get these funds out to the community, we would be in a different place right now. And so I am incredibly grateful for everyone who stepped up to the plate very quickly. Back in March of 2020, my office started a conversation with many of our housing advocates, our housing partners, to talk about how we can be incredibly responsive, be very responsive as much as possible to our residents. And that same group of folks and others were also having started their own housing conversation and really started to come together and to figure out how they could be of assistance. So, I once again, it takes a community, it takes a village to really get this work done.
Great. Thank you, Councilwoman. Any questions?
This is Bruce Lukey. Councilwoman, nice to see you. Thank you for all your support. I'm going to follow up a little bit on Patty's comment, and it may be helpful just to take a look at using some of the portion of those funds to help build capacity within government to be able to get the money out the door. So I think the concepts and everything you're talking about is awesome. I think it's great. I think it's going in the right direction. And I think I probably speak for a number of us. We just want to put it to use as quickly as we can.
Absolutely. And and good morning, Bruce. And when we talk about how we have worked in a collaborative way, Homeport is an excellent partner that we continue to work with and that continues to bring amazing projects online for our residents, typically that fall within that 80% AMI, 60% AMI category and below. So we thank you for the good work that you and your team continues to do. But with that being said, the dollars that we're receiving from the American Recovery Plan and with the CARES Act dollars, they all have timelines associated with them. And so it behooves us not to be able to ramp up some of our departments in order to get those dollars out the door. But I also want to make sure that those dollars are getting in the hands of our residents at the end of the day that really do need that housing, that really do need all of the other types of resources that are not, pertaining to this particular conversation. But when we talk about food insecurity, when we talk about, really remedying the digital divide so that our students can continue to go to school and our residents can continue to go to work virtually. There are so many priorities that the city is continuing to balance. I'll just say that I'm incredibly grateful that once again, we're receiving federal assistance somewhere to the tune of $186 million-ish, half of which that we'll be able to use this calendar year or be accessible to us this calendar year. And so already leaning in before the money hit the account about how we can really use those dollars to ensure that we are serving our housing needs and other priorities in Columbus.
Thank you. Great.
Yes.
All right. John, did you have a question? Nope. Okay.
And
great.
good to see you this morning, John. Thank you for all the work that you continue to do as well.
Thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate it. And thanks
Great.
for your work, of course.
Absolutely.
Well, with that, Josh, I'm going to ask you if you can go ahead and share your screen. Our next speaker is Josh Roth, who is a senior program coordinator with Franklin County. Josh and I have spent a lot of time working together, but increasingly spending time talking about housing over the last 12 months. So Josh, kick us off.
Great. Good morning, everybody. As mentioned, Josh Roth. I'm Senior Program Coordinator for the Franklin County Department of Economic Development and Planning. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak this morning about some of the county's affordable housing programs and in particular our approach to property tax incentives. And bear with me here for a second. I practiced this earlier and I got it first time. All right.
Yep, great. Thank you.
So first, just a small little overview of our department. Our director, Jim Shimmer, he likes to describe it as functioning a little bit like that of a small municipality. We provide community and economic development, planning and zoning services, building services, and code enforcement, and largely to the unincorporated parts of the county and also to some of the smaller villages. I work in the Economic Development Division, which has traditionally been focused on strategic partnerships, economic development incentive programs, and more recently, the county's new affordable housing initiatives. As many of you know, counties in the state are a creature of statute. So most of what we do has to be expressly permitted in the Ohio Revised Code. The map on the left side of the screen, the white areas represent the unincorporated townships. That's roughly 30% of the geographic area, but only 10% of the population. This is more or less where we can influence development through zoning and also our tax incentive programs. The lighter blue areas of the map represent the suburban municipalities, and then that combined with the white areas are what we call the balance of the county. And so this is generally the service area for our housing and urban development programs. And then, of course, the dark blue is the city of Columbus, which has about 70% of the county's population. On a county-wide basis, the department has a number of programs funded by general fund dollars. Over the last 15 years, Director Shimmer has really challenged the department to seek out gaps in the local community and economic development landscape to try and find unique ways that the county can support the growth of our political subdivisions while also advancing the goals of the Board of Commissioners. And one thing to highlight here under the general revenue programs, an example of this is we have an infrastructure bank that makes loans to local jurisdictions for projects that support job creation. And this is a unique program in that it allows debt service repayments to stay local and then remain available locally at below market interest rates. And then you'll also see our commitment to the Affordable Housing Trust as well as the Community Shelter Board. I'll touch on that in a second, and then as well as our new affordable housing programs. So in 2019, the department published an economic development strategic plan, which provided us with some broad policy guidelines. Generally, the plan is a challenge to take a more comprehensive approach to our activities and programs, to really look beyond the traditional economic development goals to basically what amounts to community improvement and inclusive growth. One of the particular tasks of this strategic plan was for the department to get more involved in promoting affordable housing throughout the county. And luckily for us, this was something that we had already been researching. We'd met with a variety of affordable housing stakeholders, developers, finance agencies, nonprofits, all with the goal to identify the tools at the county's disposal and the ways in which the county could have the most impact. And this ultimately led to an affordable housing implementation framework, of a series of recommendations to the commissioners, which focused around 3 core considerations. Through our research, we identified more than a dozen different initiatives across multiple county agencies that already touched affordable housing in some sort of way. So our first consideration was to make sure that we maintained that approximately $17 million each year that the county had already been investing. The second consideration was to undertake a review of our tax incentive policy, which I'll also touch on later, as well as making sure that we remove barriers and impediments to affordable housing in our zoning resolution. And our planning administrator filled me in that we hope to have that zoning update finished sometime before the end of the year, but no promises. The third and final consideration was to raise the conveyance fee by $1, which the commissioners did on October 2019 to seed new affordable housing programs. And we estimated that this would raise an additional $6.5 million a year, or about $65 million over the next 10. This slide is a breakdown of Franklin County's conveyance fee. It's currently set at $3 for every $1,000 of value for a real property transfer. The first dollar is mandated by the state of Ohio, and I'm pretty sure that goes to fund the operations of the county auditor's office. The first permissive dollar, it's been in effect since 2006. It's split 50-50 between the Affordable Housing Trust of Central Ohio, which is a financial institution, as well as the Community Shelter Board, which supports families facing homelessness. And then the most recent permissive dollar is it's split roughly 1/3 and 2/3, with the first third going to support the Central Ohio Community Land Trust. The city of Columbus is also an investor in that, and Councilmember Faber touched on the Land Trust briefly. Land Trust is a subsidiary of the Central Ohio Community Improvement Corporation. That's our county land bank, and its mission is to build for-sale homes on vacant lots while retaining ownership of the land through a 99-year land lease. And that land lease includes a restricted resale provision. It only allows a portion of the appreciation of the property value to leave a home upon its sales. And what this does is it ensures that the homes will become more affordable over time as property values increase, but also make sure that those homes will be available for future generations at an affordable rate. And we view this as a sort of a middle step, helping to move families from renting to full home ownership, that may not otherwise be able to afford it in such a hot real estate market. But it's also a tool that should help stem the tide of gentrification and displacement in some of our changing neighborhoods. The remaining 2/3 of our permissive dollar goes to the Franklin County Magnet Fund. Our first round of the Magnet Fund was last year in 2020. We're actually expecting applications here on the 26th for our second round. It's a pot of roughly $4 million. It's an equity grant program designed to induce new construction, specifically of 4% low-income housing tax credit projects. We learned that the 4% tax credit program only tracks about 30 to 40% of the equity to get a new construction multifamily project off the ground, and compare that to the 9%, which is in the ballpark of 60 to 70%. And so as a result, a lot of affordable housing resources in the state and Central Ohio were being left on the table each year. So the first goal of the program was to incentivize developers to start pursuing new construction projects using the 4% program, with the Magnet Fund stepping in to make that 4% look a little bit more like the 9%. We also designed the program to be the first money in to make projects that we awarded more competitive for other sources of gap funding. And because affordability and quality of life aren't solely determined by the cost of housing in an area, but also cost of transportation and access to a variety of services and amenities, we prioritize our award decisions based on proximity to high-frequency transit corridors. These awards are up to $1.35 million, and there's a per unit subsidy that increases with the number of bedrooms in each unit. So we're trying to encourage larger units for families. And then finally, I'm moving a little bit out of order here, going back to the second core consideration to talk about the tax incentive policies. The first step of that framework, the Affordable Housing Implementation Framework, was to recommend to the commissioners to begin using community reinvestment areas to support projects that utilize low-income housing tax credits and also the resources available at the Affordable Housing Trust. But on a case-by-case basis, and this goes for non-residential projects as well, we'll consider projects that accomplish some of the other goals of the commissioners. I mentioned previously that the strategic plan challenged the department to take a more comprehensive approach and look beyond the traditional economic development goals. And this is really at the heart of the SMART incentives philosophy that informed our strategic plan. So that's not looking at economic development through a purely fiscal lens to improve your local government budget, although that's important, but also to consider how projects fit into the larger context of community goals. What is it that you're really getting in exchange for an abatement? This could be anything from healthy food access, environmental justice, public health, supporting transit-oriented development, or any other form of community development or community benefit you might think of. Another aspect to our approach to property tax incentives is that we like to view them as gap financing. Most jurisdictions only use these tools as an incentive to encourage economic-based jobs or to promote neighborhood revitalization. But the department will entertain a request for just about any project. But what we will do is we will ask for the financials, do an underwriting, and then size the abatement to the gap necessary to get the project over the finish line. And then from there, we can negotiate a higher percentage based off of any other goals that might be accomplished by the project. At the county, we haven't had the opportunity to use tax increment financing to support affordable housing yet. But I once read an article about how Portland, Oregon, they dedicate 40% of their TIF proceeds to affordable housing. And since 2006, their TIFs citywide have generated over $250 million. Now, I'm sure Oregon's TIF laws are different from ours in Ohio, but we do have a similar provision in our TIF district code that we use, that we hope to be able to use someday. And those are the sections of code. 570940 is municipalities, the 73 is townships, and 78 is counties. And what it does is it allows for a portion of the TIF proceeds to be set aside for housing renovations. And that's defined simply as a project carried out for residential purposes. But it does clarify that whatever the land use is, it would ultimately have to be recognized by the state tax commissioner as residential in order to be eligible. So this is a tool that would probably be most useful in single family or duplex neighborhoods. But I bring it up because I think it represents an untapped opportunity to take advantage of our rising property values. The idea of value capture to do things like help keep seniors in their homes and also as an anti-displacement tool. And here I'm imagining some sort of a home rehab grant program, but I'm sure smarter people could come up with some interesting uses of those funds. And then the final item, apologies, Patty, if I'm stealing any of your thunder, please feel free to jump in to add or clarify. But the capital lease sales tax exemption powers of Ohio Port Authorities has really turned into an interesting and unique opportunity for the Columbus-Franklin County Finance Authority. Similar to TIFs, this fits in with the idea of value capture. In order to promote deeper affordability, the Finance Authority and the county have come up with a process to grant these sales tax exemptions on construction materials for mixed use and multifamily projects. And this is based off of a formula where the projects get to keep all or a portion of that sales tax exemption based off of the percentage of units at or below 80% AMI, also the percent of commercial space in the building, and then a boost for whether or not it'll promote density in the center city. And the remaining portion that the projects aren't eligible for, the developer then gets to decide if they want to donate those to either the Affordable Housing Trust or the Community Shelter Board as sort of a way to pay it forward for other affordable housing initiatives. And to conclude, there are a lot of interesting and creative things that can be accomplished using our current tools, but I think we just need to start thinking outside of the box and maybe look at these tools through a different light, and we can really get some good things done by way of affordable housing.
Thanks, Josh. That was really great. Boy, I'm getting some feedback here. Anybody else? No. Okay. I want to move on to our next speaker, which is Matt Rule. He is Senior Vice President with NCR, or Senior Vice President Housing Development with National Church Residences. And Matt, if you want to go ahead and kick it off, and then once you complete your presentation, we'll open it up and have some general conversation with the audience. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Patty. I'm Matt Rule. I'm with National Church Residences. We're a nonprofit senior owner, developer, and manager headquartered here in Columbus, Ohio. And it is there's a lot to cover here. A lot of different avenues we could go down, and Patty and I were talking before the call and thought, maybe the best way for us to kind of walk through what we see as an owner and sponsor is just to talk about some of the developments we've done in Franklin County over the last year or two, and how those came to be, what the different financial resources were that were instrumental in those developments. And so I know that it's a great panelists, some great panelists today. We've worked with Councilwoman Favor and Josh and the folks at the Franklin County Commissioner's Office on many of these. So I'm going to walk through them, and a couple of underlying themes that I'd like to highlight as we go through. One is, as an owner and developer, almost to a fault, all of these developments have multiple financing sources. So I think, one storyline you'll see here is that being able to weave together multiple financing sources is really important. And I think the second thing, key consideration, is timeliness. I know this was kind of alluded to earlier, both in the question about the speed of the growth of Columbus, Ohio, and also how fast resources are able to be allocated and get out the door. I think one of the great things here in Central Ohio is all the additional resources for housing development coming online. But I also think the speed of implementation is really impactful with regard to adding capacity into the system. I'm going to walk through a handful of these developments. These are 8 different developments we have actually going on right now in Franklin County that are in various stages of construction. And I'm going to start in the Northland area. For those of you familiar with Columbus, it's on the on the north side off the 161 corridor. It's a very mature neighborhood that had a senior housing issue. There's about 5,000 income burdened seniors living in Northland right now that are underhoused. And so we are working on a number of different senior developments there. The first one here is Northland Gate. This is under construction. You see on the bottom right, it's a little picture of where it's at right now. It's dried in, and we're going to wrap the construction up here later in the year. But it's 94 senior units, and it took advantage of a federal tax program called the Low Income Tax Credit Program, 9% credits through there. City of Columbus capital came in to fill a gap that was left after those 9% tax credits. And as both Josh and Councilwoman Favor talked about, what was really instrumental in getting this development financed was that a newly created CRA district. So we walked through that process with the county and with the city to create a tax-exempt district that would allow those real estate taxes really to be diverted towards funding our capital stack and paying for a conventional permanent loan to fill out the capital stack. So multiple funding sources came together. This is going to be a wonderful development. We actually, there's only 94 units here, and our team has had about 180 pre-applications submitted already, and we're 6 months away from completion. So we know there's a need. But I would say what's been a challenge is that the main funding source here, the tax credits, is about 50%, 60% of the capital stack. And that's a really highly competitive program that is great, but it's very unpredictable. And it's a 1-year cycle. So awards are issued once a year. So what is great about what Josh was talking about is the Franklin County Capital Magnet Fund program, which really says, there's other programs out there that are more predictable, are not competitive, and can we leverage those resources with additional dollars to get more housing done? And Salem Village is a perfect example of that. It's a couple miles down the road in the Northland community. It'll start here in the next 60 days. And the Franklin County Affordable Housing Magnet Funds were really catalytic in getting that done. It's great to see the Franklin County commissioners realize that their dollars could go a long way twinned with the 4% program, which is not competitive in Ohio. It's not as deep as a capital subsidy as the 9% program, but it is an underutilized resource. So that we also paired that with some additional federal funds under a federal senior program called the HUD 202 program. And then we are actually walking out a newly created CRA district right now for Salem Village that again provides that last leg of the stool. This is another Northland project on Cleveland Avenue, Bretton Woods, which will start here in about 60 days as well. This was fortunate enough to get 9% low-income housing tax credits, and the city of Columbus used their home funds to fund a gap here, and it again sits in a pending CRA district. So you'll see a common theme here, how impactful that has been.
I just joined another webinar. I just want to make sure that we do anticipate having a construction loan.
Yeah.
Hi there.
Yeah,
Someone wasn't
Hello?
muted, but I think we got it.
Got it. All right. And then just flipping, moving a little bit farther south, this is Franklinton, right outside of downtown Columbus. Another senior community taking advantage of the 9% tax credit program, and the city of Columbus, again, their home funds. This stepped into an existing CRA district that the city had already established to promote housing in the Franklinton area, an area that, for those of you familiar with it, is quickly gentrifying. And the CRA district has allowed more units to be brought in at various price points to allow folks to stay in this neighborhood that they've grown up in and raised their kids in, and not to be priced out. So again, the common theme here, the real estate taxes and the utilization of them paired with the soft monies from either home funds or the Franklin County Commissioner's Office really creates a great formula for success. And the last two developments I want to touch on real briefly, and then I'll open it up to questions, are really unique, and we're excited about them. One, because they work outside of the tax credit program, and not all developments, maybe in the neighborhoods that you're working through, are competitive for the tax credit program because of a number of criteria that you need to utilize to kind of fit a campus into that program. But they still have housing needs and housing shortages, and they still have seniors and families that need to be appropriately housed in safe and affordable housing. So we've tried to be creative outside of some of those more traditional funding streams, and we are working on a development called BROOKWOOD Point. It's a little over 100 units. It's a mixed income development that sits right outside of Bexley in the Brookwood community. And it's going to utilize some market rate units and some rent restricted units, and then be funded with tax exempt bonds in a pending CRA district. So the CRA district and the tax exemption is really important to getting this development moving along. But also what's been really important and really helpful has been the local jurisdiction, the city of Columbus, working with us on the density and scale of this development. As you try to be creative with funding sources and step outside some of the more traditional subsidies or soft programs, you really need to scale a development to be able to target a senior or a family at a reasonable price point. And so this is a perfect example of that. It's on a very busy corridor here on Livingston, and at a jurisdiction and the local community that saw the trade-offs between density and affordability. And the last one is actually a development that we just closed on about 30 days ago. It's under construction in Worthington and sits just off High Street. I usually refer to it as the development right behind Dairy Queen. At least that's what my 4 kids refer to it as. So they love doing site visits here. But this is in a historic neighborhood in Worthington. And what was exciting about this development is the community and the city of Worthington really embraced the need for affordable housing. And I think there's a conversation that's shifting in a lot of suburbs as folks see their neighbors displaced by rising home costs and rising rental rates. And they're becoming more aware of that tension. And so here there was a focus on the city letting their seniors age in place, not move out to the next green field, not have to go outside the outer belt. They wanted them to be able to stay in the community that they've grown up in, even when they transitioned to a fixed income that was more modest. And so the city worked with us. We set aside a number of units at Stafford Village. It's an 85 unit senior development. And we set aside a number of units that we agreed with the city and filed a restrictive covenant with the city to allow them to remain affordable and committed to that. And in exchange for that, the city did not have additional capital to apply towards the development. But what they did was walk through the entitlement process with us hand in glove and said, we're supportive of you having a little more density here, having a little more height on your development, if the trade-off is that the seniors in our community will have access to high quality, affordable housing. So I think that, it's something we don't think about a lot. It's outside of a grant or a loan or a more traditional capital subsidy, but the entitlement process itself can really help a sponsor's ability to retain affordability in a community. So what I wanted to do was walk through some of those examples, thinking, Patty, that it may trigger some questions. But I think, again, I would just circle back to common theme here is that, you need to weave multiple sources together. I think there's a common theme of the faster we can move, the better. And so that you'll see why I was so excited and remain so excited about some of those soft funding programs that come in around the 4% credit, because it's not competitive. You don't have to convince a landowner to wait for years. You can execute quickly and move forward. So I think, timeliness and everything we can do in this environment to move developments forward quicker and add more capacity, as Bruce was alluding to the system, is fantastic. And community support, local jurisdictions can be really flexible on the entitlement process to facilitate, some really unique community developments.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So who has a question for any of the panelists? Well,
hey, Matt, it's Bruce. On the last 2 projects, you noted tax exempt bonds. Was that in together with 4% credits or totally separate?
Totally separate. So there's no low income housing tax credits in either of those. And one of the limits, the credit program is great. One of the limitations we really see, and Columbus is a great example of this, as you have an aging population, the tax credit program really doesn't allow for some of those additional services that a more frail senior may need. So whether that's house cleaning services, or what we see really is a gap in the food services. There's no culinary in a tax credit project. So folks have to go off-site to find if they can't prep their own meals or rely on Meals on Wheels or something else. So both of these developments allow for a culinary experience that's at a really modest price point within the community itself. So I know that in both Brookwood and in Worthington, that was something the community really leaned into and embraced, was that we were able to provide some amenities that aren't available under some other of the credit programs.
Sean?
Thank you, Matt. First off, I'd say you guys did a fantastic job in promoting your project in Worthington. It was really a master class that I've even pointed to some of our market rate and single family, multifamily builders on what community engagement and getting a project off the ground. So well done on your part. My question is, how have you guys, with the balance between those units that are earmarked affordable and those that are earmarked or kind of reserved for market rate, what's the long-term viability or what's the impact on those market rate units over time? I know it's a relatively new concept, and I'm just curious if you guys have benchmarked that or what you're looking at to make sure that those market rate units don't get so overpriced over time as well.
Yeah, that's a great question, John, and I appreciate your support. And it really was a community effort in Worthington to educate and to walk forward. So thank you for walking that out with us. I think that one thing we always try to start with is that the amenity packages in the affordable and the market are the same. So there's not a have and a have-nots with regard to the finishes and the cabinets and the countertops and the flooring. But for us, that's really important for the culture of a building, right? So someone doesn't say, oh, here's what you have in your unit versus here's what I have in my unit, and we try to interdisperse them throughout the building. Size is probably the main size of the units, the main differential that we see. But as to the long-term viability, as the market keeps creeping up on those market rate units that don't have a cap, that's definitely a challenge. It is hard to those market rate units will indeed fluctuate based on the market, and if the market rises, they'll rise with the market in order to effectively cross-subsidize the affordable units. So there's a challenge there. I think the best mitigant, to keeping those market rate units at an obtainable rent level is to be really smart in your amenity package. And so not to overbuild, to work with the local jurisdiction to say, is this facade really needed? Or can we scale back a little bit? Because whatever we have to, as we know as developers, whatever you've got to put into the building, you've got to get back in rents, especially when there's not a subsidy like a tax credit involved. So, and can we do that extra? Can we get to the fourth floor? Because we know that if we can do another 20 units, we can keep the rents more moderate for everyone, and everyone benefits that's living in this community long term. If we can spread out those costs over 100 units versus over 60. So I think, John, a lot of those things come down to building design and building amenity and the jurisdiction, the local jurisdiction working with you and realizing that tension and that trade-off, that design costs money, and ultimately, unfortunately, that's typically passed along to a renter that's already being squeezed. So,
thanks, Matt. And last, more of a comment for Josh. Just as the county's is doing those updates coming up in December regarding zoning and what that map looks like, we'd be thrilled to be to work with you in advance of that. So just keep that in mind. We'd be happy to.
Excellent. I'll let the planning staff know.
Thank you.
Josh, on that note, and you may not know the answer to the question, will there be public hearings on it? I'm assuming so.
Yeah, we're still in the early stages of this. And also not my side of the office, unfortunately.
Right.
But I can clarify that for the group if that would be helpful.
Sure, great. All right, Deb from my home county, Licking.
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. It's not Zoom, so it's in a different spot. Thanks very much. Matt, well, everyone, I totally appreciate the opportunity to join you today. Yes, I'm with the Licking County Coalition for Housing. And I would love to say we have a lot of those programs here in Licking County, but we don't. So if you don't mind, Josh, and perhaps with the City of Columbus as well, I'd love to reach out and get some of those tax incentive ideas and some of the other things at least introduce to our county commissioners and city of Newark and Pataskala officials so that they at least are aware of some of those things, if they aren't already. But we don't have it in the local vernacular very often, so I'm going to assume that we don't. But my question, rather than just interrupting, was, Matt, I know, at least in the past, National Church Residents' focus has been primarily around senior housing, but I know you've also done a lot of permanent supportive housing. And I noticed that there weren't any permanent supportive housing projects in your listing today. So does that mean you're not doing them quite so much anymore, or for the purposes of this conversation, what you wanted to illustrate wasn't really included there? We're hoping to get some permanent supportive housing constructed here. Our challenge has been finding those ongoing subsidies to really allow that to happen. And of course, out in our area, a 96 unit item is pretty big. We need to look more at the 40 or below sometimes, depending on where it's located, which is a whole nother set of challenges. Yeah. But I guess my question really is, because your presentation was all around senior housing primarily, does that mean permanent supportive housing and family are just too hard right at the moment, or just a question? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, so we are primarily do senior housing, as you mentioned. We've got about 320 senior campuses, and we just have one family campus. So we know we're not. There's folks there that have, and Bruce's team is an excellent example, who have really learned those services well and how to provide for those residents. I think what we've discovered is, you know, our expertise is in the senior housing world. We do permanent supportive housing. We actually do permanent supportive senior housing, and unfortunately had an application, Deb, that didn't get funded yesterday that was permanent supportive senior housing here in Franklin County. So I think you nailed it there when you said the subsidies are really hard to bring together. So you've got to win that really competitive 9% tax credit award, and it just didn't unfortunately happen for us. And then you have to have those housing vouchers. So it's a needed product. It's just a real challenge to pull them together. And, you know, hopefully we'll have a permanent supportive housing one in the future up there. But one of the things that it doesn't lend itself to, unfortunately, is those 4% executions that, you know, Josh and the city of Columbus have really done a great job of subsidizing. But it would take an incredible amount of soft subsidy to make those happen outside of the 9% program.
And Matt, I think I'll chime in. Seems like that's a good segue into a question that I had raised with you, is if you could identify and rank the priorities for how a developer makes a decision about where they're going to invest, what would those top 5 or so, or even fewer items be that a community could do or try to pursue to position themselves better for attracting investment?
Right. That's a really good question. And again, as Deb pointed out, you know, we're a senior developer primarily, so that's kind of the hat that we wear. But I would say the number one thing for a couple key criteria. Number one for us is we really feel like seniors shouldn't have to move out of town or out to a green field or out of, you know, away from their grandkids and the church they went to and the community they developed. So we would say, we all say we want you to move in, not out. And so for us, a location that is in close proximity to amenities, whether that's transit, whether that's a mix of food services, medical services. So for us, it's really having the location first. And
CVS and Dairy Queen.
CVS and Dairy Queen, right? And there's a Fresh Time across the street. And, you know, in Northland, our first one is actually, that's under construction in the Northland area, is next to a CVS again. So we think about the seniors we're serving and the proximity to their medications and amenities. So I think location, and those are often the most challenging locations for jurisdiction to rezone, because they're in mature neighborhoods, they're tight sites, they're not 7 or 8 acres, they're 4 or 5 acres. So you've got to go up and you've got to make some reasonable concessions on the parking. You can't you can't have 150 parking spaces. It just isn't going to work on a 3-acre site. So I think if the we look for jurisdictions that are able to embrace development in mature neighborhoods, because we think that's the right thing for the residents. That's probably number one. I think the second, the second thing we're looking for is the resources that the jurisdiction had, and that resource could be CRA, it could be TIF proceeds, it could be soft monies. There's a number of different ways that a jurisdiction can support a development. And then I would just also say that maybe the third leg of that is leadership starts at the top. So a jurisdiction where the city council folks, city administration is willing to lean in through what is almost inevitably always a challenging process. And when you see that enthusiasm at the top, as you start a development, it really encourages sponsors to come to the table and move it forward.
Thank you. That's great. How about some other questions? So Morpsey, I'm going to put you on the spot, actually. I thought Deb's comment about, recognizing the value of what she's seeing happening in Franklin County and Columbus in the way of collaboration. As a former regional person and even a state economic development practitioner, I know different communities have different levels of sophistication and resources and capacity. And Morpsey, I think putting this webinar together or this group together is a step in the right direction, and I'm wondering if maybe Morpsey could play a role in trying to facilitate some of that, encouraging that collaboration of organizations and resources outside of Franklin County. Just a thought.
That is a great point, and I'll chime in. I know there are a few of us from Morpsey on the call today, but yes, that's absolutely something that we want to be able to do, is to provide support in that space too.
Great. All right. How about some other questions? So I think we addressed this question in the presentations, but I'll throw it out there anyways. Would any of the, or either of the panelists be able to cite some resources that are currently available that weren't available within the last few years? And we may have addressed all of these.
Well, I think one that the Franklin County Commissioners has really leaned into is that Franklin County Magnet Fund that Josh walked through, a new resource brought to the table. I think what's really, for folks like me, I love affordable housing and I get really nerdy on it. I was telling Patty before, so I'll try to limit acronyms, but the punchline is that the federal government in January of this year increased that 4% subsidy that you saw on so many of those slides of what we're doing in Franklin County. They increased that subsidy effectively by about 25%. And so that's a federal resource that was increased overnight and was not available, hasn't been available at that levels since its inception in the mid 80s. So that's a game changer that's accessible regardless of the local jurisdiction you're working in. Great. And then maybe the third one that I know Josh has worked with us on a couple of these developments is the federal government also reintroduced an old program called the 202 program. It's a program for seniors. It's a subsidy for senior housing developments that works with that 4% program. And they reintroduced that into their budget actually last year for the first time and doubled the budget for it this year. So that it's called the 202 program. It's available only for senior housing, but that is at the federal level, a new resource that is pretty instrumental.
Great.
The only thing I'd add to that, Patty, the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio really did a great job last year, supercharging this conversation about housing affordability, and then, Morpsey stepping in and taking the role with the strategy for the region. It really was a call to action for us to kind of shake the trees and look at the programs that we were using for, more traditional economic development in different ways. not every community has resources available to them to do things like the Franklin County Magnet Fund. But there probably are some ways for municipalities or counties in the outlying areas of the region to take a look at what types of revenue generation that they still haven't yet activated that they could dedicate to these purposes.
Great, thank you. So I'll touch, just make a few remarks about port authorities. Josh mentioned it. We are the Finance Authority, which has jurisdiction in Franklin County and then Columbus, including those areas outside of Franklin County. And so we have the ability to offer these capital lease structures. That structure allows us to convey our tax exempt status as a public entity to private entities. And in Ohio, port authorities are the only entities that are able to do that. And what you gain from that is the sales tax savings on the construction materials, which can be pretty significant on projects. And we can use that structure in our jurisdiction. We can use it in other counties with the invitation of that other county. We can't work in other jurisdictions where there's an active port authority who has the ability to do this unless they invited us in because they didn't have the desire, which probably if they don't have the desire, there may not be a policy will to offer it. So that would be a conversation worth exploring if you don't currently have capital lease structures being used in your county for this purpose. We are currently working on trying to build a loan loss reserve. We've got a really robust bond fund that we use for a lot of private developments. Most of the major developments in the Franklin County and the city have taken advantage of our bond fund for either the private development itself or for infrastructure for the project, including structured parking. Our current portfolio is pretty much based on industrial, commercial, warehouse. And so we don't have affordable housing as a part of our portfolio. So what we're trying to do to gain confidence in that type of project within our portfolio is raise a dedicated reserve that will give a backing to any sort of funding we might give against affordable housing projects. So right now we've gotten some commitments from some different organizations. We're in discussions, but I would say that's another opportunity for collaboration out there. And then we do have the ability to issue tax exempt bonds, which Matt referenced earlier. We're currently working on a project with a private nonprofit, and we'll be able to issue them, issue the bonds because of their 501c3 status. And that's going to have a significant impact on this project's ability to go forward. They had been out, shopped for financing, couldn't really gain confidence from a commercial lender to take it all on. And so through some conversations, we found out we could get comfortable with it. And we're really excited to be able to announce that one when that project goes public. So let's see here. I would be happy to answer questions there. Yes?
Just to add to that real quickly. For our Franklin County Magnet Fund competitive application process, there is a section in there where we encourage developers to reach out to the Columbus Franklin County Finance Authority because having had conversations with the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, they aren't selfish about needing to be the conduit for those tax exempt bonds. And so we included that. I don't know if any developers that have applied or plan to apply have reached out to you to try to take advantage of that. But trying to dovetail that with things like the sales tax exemption on construction materials might offer some cost savings.
That's great. And I actually wanted to throw out, is there anyone from another county who has a port or a finance authority who's doing anything different than we've discussed? Or any other resources that you're using differently than we've discussed? All right, well, I'm going to ask for questions one more time, and then if we don't get anyone weighing in, I might invite Jennifer back to help us wrap up.
Patty, I do see one question here in the chat from Karen Angelou asking about affordable housing for those with disabilities and maybe speaking to how that type of development is financed.
It's a good question. There is affordable housing for folks with disabilities, and that is generally financed under the 9% tax credit program. So that's a program, a federal program administered here in Ohio by the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. So new unit production is really financed through the Ohio Housing Finance Agency and that 9% tax credit annual award system.
Thanks,
I
Matt.
might add something there. It's also possible to finance small projects through a combination of OPA's HDGF program, which is like a small grant program paired with other sources like local money, Federal Home Loan Bank, and so forth. So it's not a program you're going to make much money on developing. It's time consuming, but you can do 8, 10, 12, 16, 20 units because of the use of the National Housing Trust Fund and its priorities and the priorities of the Federal Home Loan Bank, it tends to work well. That is to say, projects for people with disabilities score well in those programs. And that is a route to get that done. Much like years ago, we would use the 811 program when it had a capital advance part to it.
Thank you, Roy. Did everyone get that? Because if not, we might ask Morpsey to follow up with Roy and share that resource as a follow-up action to this.
Yeah, I do work as a private consultant on the outside end. I've accessed that 3, 4, 5 times now for different projects in different parts of the state for people with disabilities.
Great, thank you. All right, folks, any other questions or comments?
I have a question for the full group here, if I may take the liberty of asking. And I think, what we like to do with our peer exchanges is to really focus on those individuals, organizations, and communities that are out in front right here in Central Ohio, and all of you represent that here today. I'm also curious, Josh, you mentioned the Portland example. Matt, NCR does work across the country. Patty, with your experience, where are the opportunities that you're seeing across the country that maybe we're not doing here yet? What could we take from innovations around the country and bring to Central Ohio?
Thanks for teeing that up. I'd like give you a high five if we were in person. So I think for those folks passionate about affordable housing and workforce housing and affordable senior housing, almost half the states in the country have adopted what's called a state credit program. And that is a credit program that's paired with the federal credit program. And, the punchline is that program significantly enhances unit production in the states where it's been adopted. It's been a tremendous success in Georgia, in Colorado, in Missouri. There's a laundry list of states, and that legislation is being introduced here in the near term in Ohio for a state housing credit program that would be paired with the already existing federal credit program. And I think that could be, I know that would be really catalytic in allowing jurisdictions all across the state to address the need for more housing capacity. And it's a program that the implementation of could be really rapid. And that's why states in the last 3 or 4 years, I think, have really jumped on it, because it pairs with an already existing federal program that developers and housing finance agencies and county commissioners understand already. So the state credit program, I would say, is an incredible tool that can be leveraged for more housing production across the state.
Great, thanks, Matt. All right, folks, any other questions or comments? Doesn't have to be a question. So I'll just weigh in by saying thank you for participating today. And I also want to thank the panelists. I think they did an awesome job. And, you know, the work that you do in your daily efforts is really benefiting the region, and thank you for that as well.
Thanks, Patty.
Thanks, everybody.
Patty and all, thank you so much for a fantastic panel discussion. Folks that are still on the line, I'll just mention a slight programming note here. We are going to actually have our next peer exchange next month. So instead of every other month, we're actually going to have a special panel in June with the school districts that's going to be hosted by Tom Goodney with the Educational Services Center. So really important discussion on the intersections between housing and education. Hope you can join us for that. We'll be sending out more details very soon. Thanks again, panelists. Fantastic job.
Thank you.